Be seen inside. Rikers Island, New York's torture factory, nobody can close. There is an island in the East River that most New Yorkers never see. It is not on tourist maps. You cannot take a ferry there. There is one bridge connecting it to Queens, and unless you are a corrections officer, a lawyer, or an inmate, you're not crossing it. Rikers Island, 413 acres sitting between Queens and the Bronx, home to 10 jail facilities, one of the largest jail complexes in the world. It has been called the worst jail in America, a place where teenagers are held in solitary confinement for years, where inmates die from medical neglect, where a culture of violence has been allowed to run unchecked for nearly a century. The city has been promising to close it since 2016. They set a deadline of 2027. It is now 2026. Rikers is still open, still operating exactly as it has for the past 90 years. This is the story of how New York built a jail so broken and so corrupt that even when everyone agrees it needs to shut down, nobody can figure out how to do it. Rikers Island was not always a large island. The original landmass was just 87 acres of rocky marshland. The Riker family, Dutch settlers, purchased it in 1664 and used it for farming. By the early 1900s, it sat abandoned. Then the city had an idea. They needed somewhere to dump garbage, and they needed somewhere to hold inmates. So they combined the two. Starting in 1925, New York began piling landfill onto Rikers Island. Trash, ash, and construction debris. Over 15 years, they added more than 300 acres of waste and covered it with soil. The island grew from 87 acres to 413 acres, all of it built on literal garbage. In 1932, they opened the first jail on the island. It was supposed to be temporary, a short-term holding facility for people awaiting trial. Nobody was meant to stay long. That is still technically true today. Rikers is a jail, not a prison. Most of the people held there have not been convicted of anything. They are legally innocent, simply waiting for their court date. The problem is they cannot afford bail. So they sit in Rikers for months, sometimes over a year, while their lives fall apart on the outside. They lose jobs, they lose apartments, some lose custody of their children, all while they are still presumed innocent under the law. And they wait on an island built on garbage inside a system that has spent decades failing the people trapped inside it. Here is what the official reports do not fully prepare you for. At Rikers Island, the corruption and violence have not come only from inmates. For decades, a culture of abuse developed among some corrections officers that went largely unchecked. In the 1990s, officers at several facilities were found to have organized fights between inmates for their own entertainment. This was not rumor. Multiple officers testified under oath that it took place regularly inside Rikers facilities. In 2012, a corrections officer named Brian Call was arrested for orchestrating a pattern of brutal assaults on inmates. He and other officers would identify prisoners who had filed complaints, then coordinate attacks on them. They called these incidents tune-ups. Call was eventually convicted and sent to prison, but investigators made clear he was not an isolated case. He was simply the one who got caught. A federal investigation in 2014 found that teenage inmates at Rikers were being physically harmed by staff on a regular basis. The report described a deeply embedded culture of violence. Young people were left with broken bones, damaged vision, and lasting injuries. One 16-year-old sustained permanent hearing loss following an assault by officers. The union representing corrections officers, known as the Correction Officers Benevolent Association, is one of the most politically powerful unions in New York City. It has consistently fought reform efforts, protected officers facing misconduct allegations, and used its influence to block oversight. The result is a system where accountability is rare and consequences are limited. Officers who commit misconduct often face internal hearings that go nowhere. Victims, many of whom are already marginalized and unable to afford attorneys, rarely see justice. Then there is the issue of contraband. Drugs have flowed through Rikers for years. A federal investigation in 2023 found that some corrections officers were actively bringing in contraband and selling it to inmates. Several officers were arrested, more remained under investigation. This is not a new problem. Reports of drug smuggling inside Rikers go back decades, but the pattern repeats because the consequences remain too small and the oversight remains too weak. The people most harmed by all of this are the ones who had the least power to begin with. People who could not afford bail. People with mental illness who ended up in jail instead of treatment. People who made a mistake and are waiting for a chance to answer for it in court, but instead find themselves trapped in a facility where the risk of harm is high every single day. More than 70 people have died in custody at Rikers since 2016. Some died from violence, some died by suicide after not receiving adequate mental health support, others died from medical emergencies that were not treated in time. Each death came with an investigation. Each investigation came with promises of reform, and the cycle continued. If there is one story that captures everything broken about Rikers Island, it belongs to a young man named Kalief Browder. In 2010, Kalief was 16 years old and living in the Bronx. He was accused of stealing a backpack. He maintained from the beginning that he did not do it. But his family could not afford the $3,000 bail that was set. So Kalief was sent to Rikers Island to wait for his trial. He waited 3 years. 3 years in Rikers Island for a crime he was never convicted of. A crime that, in the end, he was never even tried for. During that time, Kalief spent nearly 2 years in solitary confinement. 23 hours a day, alone in a small cell. No meaningful human contact, no programs, no sunlight. The United Nations has stated that prolonged solitary confinement constitutes cruel and inhumane treatment. Kalief endured it for close to 700 consecutive days. He was harmed by both staff and other inmates during his time there. He attempted to end his own life multiple times while incarcerated. Each time, the system that was holding him failed to provide adequate support. Prosecutors repeatedly offered him plea deals. Admit to the charge, accept probation, and go home. Kalief refused every offer because he said he did not do it, and he was not willing to say otherwise. In 2013, after 3 years, the charges were dropped. No trial, no verdict. The case simply went away. Kalief came home and tried to rebuild. He enrolled in community college. He began speaking publicly about what he had experienced. People listened. His story reached national audiences and led to conversations about bail reform and the treatment of young people in the justice system. But the damage from those 3 years could not be undone. In 2015, Kalief Browder passed away at his family's home. He was 22 years old. His story became a turning point in the public conversation about Rikers Island. A documentary was produced. Lawmakers made pledges. The mayor of New York City announced a plan to close Rikers entirely. That was 2015. Rikers is still open. Kalief Browder was not the only person whose life was irreparably changed by time spent in that facility. He was simply the one whose story broke through. For every name that made the news, thousands of others carried similar damage home in silence, back to neighborhoods and families that were never equipped to help them heal. His story is not a footnote. It is the reason this conversation exists, and the fact that Rikers remains open a decade after his death says everything about the distance between political promises and real accountability. So why is Rikers Island still open? In 2016, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a plan to close the facility by 2026. The proposal involved building 4 smaller modern jails across the city's boroughs. Newer facilities with better conditions, located closer to courthouses so inmates could attend hearings without hours-long transport delays. The plan ran into serious problems almost immediately. First, the corrections officers' union opposed it. Despite assurances that staff would transfer to the new facilities, the union raised objections around job security, seniority, and pension structures. Their political weight made the opposition difficult to ignore. Second, communities pushed back hard against the new jail sites. In every borough selected for a new facility, local residents and business owners organized against the plan. They raised concerns about property values, neighborhood character, and public safety. City council members who might otherwise support closing Rikers found themselves facing intense pressure from constituents. Third, the cost grew far beyond original projections. The plan was initially budgeted at around $8 billion. Estimates climbed to $10 billion, then higher. Construction delays, inflation, and labor costs kept pushing the numbers up. City officials began questioning whether the financial commitment was sustainable. And fourth, there was no answer to the most basic logistical question. Where do the roughly 6,000 people currently held at Rikers go while new facilities are being built? The state prison system is separate and already at capacity. Simply releasing everyone awaiting trial is not legally or practically possible. The city has no interim solution. The result is paralysis. The city cannot close Rikers until new jails are ready. The new jails cannot be built quickly enough because of political and financial obstacles. And so the deadline slips and Rikers stays open another year. There is also a harder truth underneath all of this. Many of the institutions and individuals who hold power in New York City have limited personal exposure to what happens inside Rikers. The people who are directly harmed by it are disproportionately poor, disproportionately people of color, and disproportionately without political influence. That has always made it easier to delay. The Corrections Officers Union donates to campaigns and mobilizes voters. Construction delays cost money, but not votes. But the people inside Rikers cannot vote while incarcerated. They cannot hire lobbyists. They cannot run ads. The city has known for decades that this facility is not functioning as a just or humane institution. Report after report, lawsuit after lawsuit, death after death has made that clear. Closing Rikers requires spending real money, making difficult political decisions, and telling powerful constituencies things they do not want to hear. That kind of leadership is rare. The current deadline is 2027. City officials have quietly acknowledged they are unlikely to meet it. Meanwhile, the island built on garbage continues to function exactly as it always has, and the people trapped inside it keep paying the price.